Hello students, welcome to MOOC course on Environmental Humanities. We are in week 3 and this is lecture number 11 of the course. We are going to talk about few different things in today's discussion which have been correlated to the texts, things like essays, reportage, reflective writing. In the previous lecture we talked about climate change through essays, reportage, reflective writing, because when we are talking about in humanities, it is connected to different kinds of writing, and therefore we discuss different styles of writing that are used by writers in their novels and other things. We also talked about the different genres. Now today's lecture is going to talk about novel as a literary form and explore how fiction represents crisis, human responsibilities, and climate change. In this lecture, we turn to the novel as a literary form and explore how fiction represents environmental crisis. Because fiction is a very important writing style of literature, a genre of literature, and most of the modern literature is read and written in the form of fiction. So we turn to now novel and see how it represents an human responsibility, environmental crisis, and climate change. We will see how novels make slow and often invisible environmental changes meaningful through narrative, characters, and lived experience. With this shift from non-fictional forms to fiction, let us begin by considering the relationship between climate change, literature, and human experience. As we have just discussed, literature offers a powerful way of understanding environmental issues beyond scientific facts and statistics. While scientific reports provide us with data about rising temperatures, biodiversity loss, and ecological degradation, literature helps us understand how these changes affect human lives, emotions, and communities. Climate change is widely recognized as one of the most pressing challenges of the 21st century. We talked about this in the beginning of the discussions of the lectures. The very opening lecture, I talked about the fact that in 21st century, environmental discussions are going to be one of the important things. Its effects are visible in various forms, including extreme weather events, rising sea levels, habitat destruction, and the displacement of both human and non-human populations. However, these changes are not experienced merely as environmental events. They also reshape social relationships, cultural practices, and everyday life. This is where literature becomes particularly significant. Through stories, characters, and narrative experiences, literature makes large-scale environmental issues more accessible and meaningful. It allows readers to engage with climate change not only as scientific phenomenon but also as a human experience. One important literary response to these concerns is climate fiction, often referred to as cli-fi. This body of writing explores the relationship between climate change, human responsibility, and the natural world. By presenting environmental issues through narrative, such texts encourage readers to reflect on the consequences of human actions and the future of the planet. Having established the importance of literature in addressing environmental concerns, now let us examine the concept of climate fiction and understand how this genre emerged in response to growing ecological awareness. So, we have been talking about literature and environmental concerns in many lectures now. So, we have to build upon all that we have discussed so far. I'm sure you have listened to the lectures prior to this one. That will help you in understanding what we are going to talk here, because it is built on all that has been already said. Now let us focus on cli-fi or climate fiction. So the emergence of cli-fi is closely associated with to growing global awareness of environmental crises. As climate change became an increasingly urgent issue in scientific, political, and public discussions, writers also began exploring its implications through literature. Rather than presenting environmental issues solely through facts and statistics, these writers used narrative to imagine how climate change might affect individuals, communities, and societies. Climate fiction typically explores themes such as global warming, ecological destruction, environmental instability, resource scarcity, and the consequences of human actions on the natural world. What makes this genre particularly significant is its ability to connect large-scale environmental processes with personal and social experiences. Readers encounter climate change not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality experienced by characters within a narrative. Another important feature of cli-fi is its imaginative dimension. Many climate narratives project possible futures shaped by environmental change. These imagined futures are not merely speculative. They encourage readers to reflect on present actions and consider their long-term consequences. In this way, climate fiction often functions both as a warning and as a space for critical reflection. At the same time, cli-fi is not limited to depicting environmental disasters only. It also explores questions of responsibility, adaptation, resilience, and the complex relationship between humans and nature. Through storytelling, the genre invites readers to think critically about the environmental challenges facing contemporary society. Now that we have understood what climate fiction is and the concerns it addresses, the question arises, why has this genre become so relevant in contemporary discussions of climate change? One of the most significant contributions of cli-fi is its ability to raise environmental awareness. Climate change is often discussed through scientific reports, policy documents, and statistical data. While these sources are essential, they may not always be accessible or emotionally engaging for a wider audience. Climate fiction bridges this gap by presenting environmental issues through compelling stories and relatable characters. Another important aspect of cli-fi is that it connects scientific knowledge with everyday human experience. Through narrative, readers are able to see how climate change influences individual lives, social relationships, and communities. In this way, complex scientific concerns become more understandable and meaningful. Climate fiction also promotes environmental consciousness. By depicting the consequences of ecological degradation, these narratives encourage readers to think about their own relationship with the environment. Rather than presenting climate change as a distant problem, they highlight its relevance to contemporary society. Cli-fi addresses some of the most pressing global issues of our time. That includes environmental justice, resource scarcity, displacement, and sustainability. Now, these themes encourage readers to engage critically with challenges facing the modern world. This genre invites reflection on the consequences of inaction. Many climate narratives illustrate what may happen if environmental problems continue to be ignored. In doing so, they encourage critical thinking about responsibility, decision making, and the future of the planet. Now, having explored the significance of climate change, we need to understand to the genre itself and to some literary text and examine how climate crisis is represented within them. Now, here are some novels. Let us turn to some novels. These novels demonstrate how environmental concerns are transformed into compelling narratives that engage readers both intellectually as well as emotionally. The first is Jeanette Winterson's The Stone Gods. published in 2007. The novel presents a futuristic world facing ecological collapse through its depiction of a society that repeatedly exploits natural resources and ignores environmental warnings. The novel highlights humanity's failure to learn from past mistakes. Winterson suggests that technological advancement alone cannot solve environmental problems if patterns of overconsumption and ecological neglect continue. The recurring destruction of civilizations within the novel reinforces the idea that environmental crises are often the result of repeated human choices rather than unavoidable natural events. The second text is Barbara Kingsolver's Flight Behavior, which was published in 2012. Unlike Winterson's futuristic setting, Kingsolver, the second text is Barbara Kingsolver's Flight Behavior, published in 2012. Unlike Winterson's futuristic setting, Kingsolver situates climate change within an ordinary rural community. The unusual migration of monarch butterflies becomes a powerful symbol of environmental disruption. Through this event, the novel explores how climate change affects everyday life and reveals tensions between scientific knowledge and public perception. Kingsolver demonstrates that climate change is not merely a distant global phenomenon, but a reality that can directly influence local environments and communities. Although these novels differ in setting and narrative approach, both illustrate how literature can make environmental issues visible and meaningful. They encourage readers to consider the causes and consequences of ecological change while reflecting on human responsibility. So, the Stone Gods and Flight Behavior both focus on ecological disruption in different ways. There are other novels which expand this discussion by exploring environmental instability, displacement, and vulnerable ecosystems. For example, The Rapture and The Hungry Tide. Now, look at these two novels which broaden our understanding of the climate crisis by questions of faith, displacement, and survival. The Rapture is written by Liz Jensen. In 2009, it was published, and this novel combines environmental concerns with psychological and prophetic elements. It presents a world increasingly affected by earthquake and ecological instability, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and impending catastrophe. Through its narrative, the novel explores how individuals attempt to make sense of environmental crises that seem beyond human control. The important aspect of this text is its engagement with the relationship between science and belief. Rather than presenting climate change solely as a scientific issue, Jensen examines how people interpret and respond to crises through different frameworks of understanding. The second text is Amitav Ghosh's The Hungry Tide, published in 2004. Now, this novel is set in Sundarbans, a unique and ecologically vulnerable region. This novel explores the complex relationship between human communities and natural environment. The landscape itself plays a central role in the narrative, constantly reshaped by tides, storms, and environmental forces. Ghosh highlights the challenges faced by marginalized communities living in such fragile ecosystems. The novel demonstrates how environmental change often affects vulnerable populations most severely, leading to displacement, insecurity, and conflict over resources. Now, if we look at both the novels together, that is The Rapture and The Hungry Tide, both show that climate crisis is not merely an environmental issue, but it is also a social, cultural, and ethical concern. Both texts reveal how environmental instability shapes human lives, beliefs, and relationships in profound ways. Now, we can identify a common concern that unites these all four texts. which is environmental degradation. Although each novel presents a different setting and narrative approach, they all depict the damaging consequences of human actions on the natural world. In The Stone Gods, environmental degradation appears on a planetary scale. The novel portrays a world devastated by excessive consumption, technological exploitation, and unsustainable development. Winterson suggests that ecological destruction is not not an isolated event, but a recurring pattern in human history. The repeated collapse of civilizations serves as a warning about the long-term consequences of environmental degradation, environmental neglect. In flight behavior, environmental degradation is represented through altered butterfly migration patterns. What initially appears to be an unusual natural event gradually reveals deeper ecological disruptions caused by climate change. Kingsolver demonstrates how global environmental transformations can become visible through changes in the local ecosystems. This novel reminds readers that climate change often manifests through the subtle but significant alterations in the natural world. Similarly, the third novel, The Rapture, presents environmental imbalance through a series of natural disasters. The recurring earthquakes and apocalyptic atmosphere reflect a world experiencing ecological instability. Here, environmental degradation is associated with growing uncertainty and the breakdown of familiar systems. In Hungry Tide, this degradation is depicted through erosion, rising tides, and threats to biodiversity in the Sundarbans. The novel emphasizes the fragile balance between human life and nature. Environmental changes directly affect both ecosystems and the communities that depend upon for survival. Across these texts, environmental degradation is not presented as a distant or abstract problem in all four texts. Instead, it is shown as a reality that shapes landscapes, communities, and everyday lives. These novels encourage readers to recognize the far-reaching consequences of ecological damage and the urgency of addressing environmental challenges. While environmental degradation forms an important part of these narratives, the novels also emphasize another crucial issue, that is the role of human actions in creating and intensifying environmental crises. So, these texts do not present ecological crises, as I said, purely as natural events. They consistently emphasize the role of human actions in producing and intensifying environmental problems. Now let us look at those things here. In The Stone Gods, Janet Winterson presents environmental collapse as the direct result of human behavior. The novel critiques excessive consumption, technological dependence, and the relentless pursuit of economic growth without regard for ecological limits. Despite repeated warnings and previous experiences of destruction, societies continue to make the same mistakes. Winterson's central argument is that environmental crises are not inevitable. They are shaped by human choices and the refusal to adopt more sustainable ways of living. A similar concern appears in Barbara Kingsolver's Flight Behavior. Here, climate change is not caused by a single action but by broader patterns of social behavior and collective inaction. The novel highlights how limited awareness, misinformation, and resistance to scientific knowledge can delay meaningful responses to environmental challenges. Through the experiences of ordinary individuals, Kingsolver demonstrates that climate change is not only a scientific issue but also a cultural one. Both novels therefore encourage readers to reflect on responsibility. They suggest that environmental crises emerge from decisions made by individuals, institutions, and societies over long periods of time. Human impact is presented not simply as a physical damage to the environment but also as a failure to recognize and respond to ecological warnings. This focus on the responsibility prepares us for the other two texts, which further explore how human activities contributed to environmental instabilities and how vulnerable communities often bear the consequences of this action. Now look at The Rapture and The Hungry Tide. The two texts that we talked about in the previous slide, they focused on overconsumption, ignorance and inaction. Now in The Rapture, environmental instability is closely linked to human exploitation of the earth. The novel suggests that ecological crises are not isolated events but symptoms of deeper imbalances created by human activity. The recurring natural disasters depicted in the narrative serve as reminders of the fragile relationship between human societies and the environment. Jensen encourages readers to reflect on the consequences of treating nature as something that can be endlessly controlled or exploited without repercussions. The Hungry Tide presents this issue from a different perspective. Because you know that it is set in the sensitive region of the Sundarbans, the novel explores how human settlement, economic activities and developmental pressures affect fragile ecosystems of Sundarbans. Amitav Ghosh highlights a crucial dimension of environmental crisis, that is inequality. The people most affected by environmental challenges are those who have the fewest resources and the least power to respond. Such marginalized communities face displacement, insecurity, and the loss of traditional ways of life as environmental conditions become increasingly unstable. So, all these novels reveal that environmental crises are deeply connected to human actions for all the reasons. They remind us that the consequences of climate change are not experienced equally. Some communities are far more vulnerable than others, raising important questions about environmental justice and responsibility. Now, the question comes is, how does literature itself contribute to environmental awareness and encourage readers to engage with ecological concerns? So, this broader question is, what role does literature play, or what role does any genre of literature play? Why might a novel be an effective medium for communicating climate concerns? As we all know that one of the greatest strengths of literature is its ability to create emotional engagement. Scientific reports can inform us about environmental problems, but literature enables readers to experience these issues through the lives of characters. In novels like the ones that I have named here, Flight Behavior and The Hungry Tide, readers witness how environmental change affects ordinary people, their relationships, livelihoods, sense of place. As a result, climate change becomes more than a scientific concept, it becomes a lived human experience. This emotional connect often encourages deeper reflection and empathy among the readers. The second important function of literature is its ability to make the invisible visible. Many environmental changes occur gradually and may not be immediately noticeable in everyday life. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and ecological degradation often unfold over long periods of time. Through narrative, literature brings these slow processes into focus and helps readers recognize their significance. For example, The Stone Gods imagines the consequences of ecological collapse on a global scale, transforming abstract environmental concerns into a vivid narrative world. Similarly, The Rapture uses environmental instability and apocalyptic imagery to dramatize the potential consequences of ecological imbalance. Through such representations, literature translates complex environmental processes into experiences that readers can visualize and understand. So, all in all, literature complements scientific knowledge when it comes to cli-fi. Because science explains environmental change, literature helps readers feel its human and emotional implications. Now, beyond creating awareness and emotional engagement, literature also encourages readers to question the social and political systems that contribute to environmental crisis. How does it do so? First, literature often critiques the social, economic, and political systems. So rather than presenting climate change as purely natural phenomenon, many environmental novels examine the structures and practices that make ecological crises possible. Issues such as excessive consumption, unchecked capitalism, resource exploitation, and political inaction frequently emerge as important concerns within these narratives. For instance, the Stone Gods critiques patterns of overconsumption and technological excess, while other climate narratives reveal how short-term economic interests often take precedence over long-term environmental sustainability. By exposing these underlying causes, literature encourages readers to question dominant assumptions about progress, development, and human control over nature. A second important contribution of literature is its ability to give voice to marginalized communities. Environmental crises do not affect people equally. We have discussed that quite at length. Communities with limited economic, political, or social resources are often the most vulnerable, yet their experiences are often overlooked in mainstream discussions. So this is particularly evident in the novels like Hungry Tide, where this environmental change is depicted through the experiences of the marginalized people and their problems of displacement, survival, social inequality. So the narrative, through such narratives, literature is putting in mainstream the problems of marginalized people as far as climate is concerned. So readers are able to judge and assess that who considers most in the environmental problems, and this critique of harmful systems and amplification of marginalized voices expands our understanding of climate change beyond scientific and environmental dimensions. It also represents various other aspects like social, political, and ethical issues. So these are very important aspects of literature that it performs to showcase. These are some more qualities that I have reflected, like the reflective of, as you can see, some more things like, inspiring awareness and reflection, because it promotes eco-conscious thinking and responsibility. It encourages readers to rethink their relationship with nature. So like, how nature is, we can adjust with nature, what are the different things. This is a reflective dimension. While literary texts remain powerful tools, this is because of these two reasons also, because the environmental literature rarely provides simple solutions to complex ecological problems. Instead, it invites readers to pause and consider the consequences of human actions. Stories and characters as well as narrative experiences depict to readers that they should encourage themselves to think about their responsibilities toward environment and the impact of their choices on future generations. So many climate novels create what may be described as ecological awareness. They help readers recognize that humans are not separate from nature, but are deeply interconnected with ecological systems. Environmental change, therefore, is not something happening outside human society. It is a process that directly influences human lives, cultures, and futures. This reflective quality can be seen across the text discussed in all these novels that I have discussed here today. Now, if you look at the theoretical aspects that will help you in understanding these texts, to define and to analyze them theoretically, we have discussed the concepts of Anthropocene and eco-criticism. So if you look at from those perspectives, you will find that literary scholars often use these concepts to study the contemporary fiction, and these novels have discussed all these things like the Stone Gods, Flight Behavior, The Rapture, and The Hungry Tide. They also can be read through these theoretical frameworks. Eco-criticism examines the relationship between literature and the environment, exploring how the text represents the ecological change within the natural world. And Anthropocene studies, on the other hand, focus on the idea that human activity has become a major force in shaping the Earth's systems. A key insight offered by these approaches is that humans can no longer be viewed as separate from nature. Instead, human actions are increasingly recognized as influencing climate patterns, ecosystems, and biodiversity. So, these texts also contribute to what scholars describe as the decentering of the human. For centuries, many literary and cultural traditions placed human interest at the center of understanding the world. Environmental literature challenges this perspective by emphasizing the agency of non-human forces such as animals, rivers, forests, oceans, and ecosystem. Nature is not merely a passive background, it actively shapes events and influences human lives. So if you look at Hungry Tide, the landscape of the Sundarbans functions almost like a character in its own right. Similarly, environmental forces play a crucial role in shaping the narratives of the other texts discussed in here. So these perspectives are very helpful in assessing the novels written for climate purpose. Now, other topics are like number one, crisis beyond environment. So, contemporary environmental literature increasingly presents climate crisis as a crisis of various other things: political, social, ethical structures, and human imagination. So, many of the texts examined in this lecture suggest that environmental problems are closely connected to broader historical and cultural processes such as consumerism, technological dependence, colonial expansion, and sustainable models of development. So as a result, climate change cannot be understood only as a scientific or environmental phenomenon. You can see the slide here. It says that climate change presented as a crisis of ethics, system, and imagination, critiques capitalism, colonial histories, and technological access. So this is also the role that these novels play in doing so. And the limits of human perception are also visible in these novels, because human perception cannot assess something which is beyond one lifetime, or something which is beyond the normal timelines or linearity which we are very habitual of. So this is challenging, but these novels can help. They present these examples through narrative symbolism and imagination. The literary text can make large-scale environmental processes more visible and emotionally accessible, because they can compress time, connect individual experiences to global developments, and illustrate consequences that may otherwise appear distant or abstract. Then these are some of the books that you can read, the novels that I have taken up here. I advise you to read these novels. You will enjoy reading them. Here is a small task for you. You should select any task out of suggested reading, any one of the novels, and find out one quote related to environment, explain it, and discuss it. So this is in this lecture. I hope you have enjoyed talking about these novels, and that has inspired you into reading more thoroughly. I advise that you read these novels. Thank you very much. I meet you in different lecture.